Welcome back for part 2 of the tube frame chassis build. I've been cleaning up quite a bit this morning. I got another project I got to get in here and work on for a little bit today, but otherwise I'll be still getting in several hours on this. During the week, off camera, I did a few things. I built the transmission cross member. It hasn't been welded in yet. I'm still deciding on where that's going to go. I also pulled all the brackets off of the rear end housing. None of them were going to be usable anyway. They were all at slightly different angles and spacing for a dirt car setup. So I'm going to be building all of my own stuff right from the get-go on this. So I wanted it cleaned up. All the brackets are cut off of it. I then got it moved and centered in the chassis. We also set the pinion angle, or at least pretty close to where it's going to be. I just wanted to have everything really close as possible, because ideally now I have this thing set for center line on the axle, so it's positioned exactly where it should be in the chassis. As long as nothing gets changed as far as how the build is going to go here, I should be able to keep this set up all the way till I'm putting the brackets on and literally have all the suspension pieces mounted for the rear end. The really easy part here was based on where my ride height was coming out to. All I had to do was stack these things on another set of 6x6 for another 5.5 inches to get me to 11 inches of ground clearance underneath the bottom of the axle, and it's a 3-inch tube, but it puts me at 12.5, which is exactly middle of the tire size anyway, where the axle tube needs to be on center line. So that made this really easy as far as spacing, and then just with these wood blocks to kind of hold in place while I positioned it under the chassis. I also used the laser to line up the axle center line and make sure that I had it at square. The next part that I'm planning out is what I guess we call them torque boxes are going to be, where the lower control arms mount. Based on the rear end width and the back spacing of the wheel options that I have, I was looking at setting this thing up to take a standard Corvette size wheel. However, with my front hubs, that looks like it could be a problem with them sticking out past the front of the wheel, which that really isn't the problem. The problem is some of the Corvette wheels have that smaller hubcap recess, and it won't actually pass through. However, I did recently just pick up another set of Corvette wheels, probably C4 fitments, so they're for the older stuff. My hubs fit right in that, no problem. Those wheels also have a little bit less back spacing. It's only about 1.25 inches difference. Looking at that for how far the wheel is going to come back from the face of the axle, we're going to end up having to move these link arms in pretty far, which, you know, not the end of the world, and I certainly could add spacer and move them out. Being as close to the wheel would give better control. However, the further I go out, the more in between these two frame rails we end up, and I'm just kind of worried about the stresses back and forth versus how much less stress there's going to be if it's tight closer to the inner frame rail, where it's going to easily clear any of the wheel options I go with in the back. So most likely I'm going to end up somewhere between 3 and 5 inches out from here. It's probably going to just shoot for 4, be right in the middle. I know that'll clear on both ends. And then we'll have some kind of gusset here. My plan is the leftover pieces of this tubing is going to be just a cross brace in here, and then some kind of a torque box gusset with the adjustment holes in there. Still doing the math on whether or not we're going to need to come above flush. I know we certainly got room. We can go down basically almost to touching the ground in the back without having any issues. However, I don't want to limit myself if I need more adjustment. This is one of them stages of planning that ends up taking up a lot of time, and that's where to position this transmission cross member. I was pretty committed to welding it in right here and having a bolt-on mount, but with the transmission, as you can kind of see over here, the mount's here, and I was planning on having that cross member back here, so it's about a 10-inch spread. And for me, just it seems like 10 inch, you know, that's hanging out there. I'm pretty happy with this right now. Just checking against some of the sheet metal stuff I have for the firewall and the trans tunnel. It should work out. It might be a little bit snug around the bell housing area up there, but there still should be plenty of room for getting in there. I think I'm going to go with this setup. The transmission's forward about a ½ inch from where it'll mount. The cross member is where it should be so that it can be dead center. And then I can put some bushings that travel all the way through, so when I bolt it up it stays nice and tight. I'll have to make this removable then. I've got a small shim underneath the front of the transmission bell housing, and I got the block in a little spacer underneath the mount back there, and that's in order to make the center line of the transmission level. As you can see, we'll end up with good transmission clearance in the center of the car. Also, that cross member will be right there, so I'm not worried about anything bottoming out on the transmission. The reason I'm having problems with that on my current car is there's obviously quite a bit of taper, because that right there is the low point. So the engine transmission got to be tapered a couple of degrees down to the back in the other car. Well, I want the engine and transmission to be dead level. That maximizes the ground clearance in the middle of the car. It might cause some issues at the front, but we can work around those as far as space later on. I really don't think that the difference of maybe 3/4 of an inch lower at the front of the engine is gonna hurt me just by taking that tilt out where the transmission's down, the engine to be up, kind of a thing. For now, I just tacked in the transmission cross member to help hold everything. I did partially weld these two pieces in, and I got finish welded in the corners here and partially welded up top on the frame. And then I was able to remove the bar that I had in here as a spreader bar. Didn't move at all, it's still right on 29 inches, so that's nice to see. The only reason I only partially welded was I did all of the verticals, and I didn't want to do the top until I'm ready to be able to flip this thing completely over, where I can just weld all the tops, flip it, and weld the bottoms, kind of a thing. Or get it tipped up on the side where I can reach both sides at once. Because that's how I went through welding all these verticals. I go down one side, immediately do the opposite side, jump to the other edge of the frame, and just kind of kept bouncing back and forth until I got it all welded. I've been kind of trying to run through different options for brackets for the rear suspension, but I don't know, I'm gonna have to start making some drawings there and then see if it's gonna be something I'm gonna cut by hand or just get ordered, or if I can make some generic stuff work. I don't like the idea of the generic stuff, because what I've seen with a little bit of quick looking seems like a very large distance between adjustment holes. And I've noticed where I only do 3/4 inch spacing on ½ inch holes on the current car, and like every single hole movement is a noticeable change in the handling of the car. So I don't want to all of a sudden go from a 3/4 inch change to a 1.25 inch change. It seems like it might be too aggressive and I won't be able to really fine tune it. So I might end up making my own brackets, or being able to just make a drawing and then do, you know, some kind of laser cut order thing. So, but start with the small box, I guess. So these are the slugs for chassis adjustment. This should be the pull rod setup, which is going to be for one of the upper rear links. Was happy to pay the price for the used part. I think it was about $85 or something like that. The brand new ones of this style are almost $500. And they don't even come with a spring on them at that price. So this is a pull rod. It has a spring on it and a bushing, so this is a two-way. And by two-way, what I mean is typically you'd have a straight upper rod for the third link, which is what I got in the other car. Which they're different lengths or whatever, but I just have a solid bar like this in the other car. So when throttle is applied, it pulls, and when it brakes, it pushes. The difference with one like this is it helps ease the torque application. So when this one sees power applied, it pulls, and when it pulls, it'll end up letting the rear end pivot a little bit and compress the spring. It softens the torque impact, like on a harder launch or when you're getting on throttle exiting a corner. It'll put some of the energy into this spring to absorb it instead of it putting all of it right into the tire and possibly breaking loose. So this provides a little bit of additional traction at the expense of letting the rear end move around a little bit and change the pinion angle. It also has a bushing here which affects the opposite way. So if you step on the brakes, it's going to compress. So it's going to release whatever tension was built up in that spring, and when this comes down, it begins pressing and compressing this bushing. Under braking, same thing, giving just a little bit of give there to soften that blow. My plan right now is to do a decoupled 3-link. So really, this is only going to get used in acceleration, where we'll be able to have it with a little bit of angle if the rear end's back here. So under throttle, it'll pull, and that'll lift the chassis of the car and plant the rear tire. The problem with that setup, especially with the solid link, is that when you go onto the brakes, it's doing the opposite. It's pushing the chassis down, therefore lifting the axle and tires up off the ground, losing grip. So what we want to do is we want to run a combination. We want to run this lower pull bar with some downward angle to do the accelerating effect. And we want a different bar that's pointed up for braking. And the difference being is we need the throttle side rod to slip and be free under braking, and we need the braking rod to slip and be free under acceleration, so that there's no binding, because we're going to end up with these pointing at different angles and slightly different mount points. And that way we'll be able to get the best of both worlds. I've not built one of these before, I've not designed one of these before, so this is very much learn as I go as far as this decoupled 3-link, so that'll be fun. So this is my Woodward precision steering rack I bought used. It's a 2.36 ratio, which I wanted to go with because it was the closest to the 2.5 ratio of the Coleman rack that's in the other car. I would have found another Coleman rack, it's just there was nothing for sale on eBay at the point in time. I'm just fine with the Woodward because these are actually kind of a higher end unit compared to some of the other stuff. So I was pretty happy with that. I just wanted to make sure that I had a power assist cylinder on it, and I wanted the 17 1/4 center to center on this rack, because that matches up well with the G-body as far as where the stock lower control arm points are at. So I'll also be able to line up this pretty easily with whatever lower control arm setup I decide to build as far as a pivot point, which makes sure that bump steer won't be a huge issue. So here's the rest of the parts that I had ordered. Starting with, because it was on sale, helmet hook for roll cage. I've got 4 2x4 end cap plates, which I'll need for the tube frame front and rear. We have a rack mount. So this is for there's the 3-bolt flange for the rack. So this bolts in there. It's got a little bit of adjustability side to side in it before getting tightened down, and it makes it a nice, easy way to weld it to something. This is the spline sway bar tubing kit. If you're looking at doing a splined sway bar, I really recommend this kit because it's almost less money than what this metal costs to buy it separately. It's a pretty amazing deal. What gets kind of spendy is the arms. I went with these 30 degrees just like I did on the other car because it does give me quite a bit of height range of adjustability. And because they're nice big heavy steel, these can be bent, whether heating up with a torch or just putting in a big press. The ones on the other car I just did with a big press when I was at work. Here we've got bearings for the ends. They just press in there and kind of the arms for the sway bar hold them on. I've got the slotted brackets for the upper control arm mounts in the front. A couple of quick gussets for those. And I have a bunch of 0 offset slugs that I ordered for being able to set everything up and have adjustment window in both directions. And I got a couple of sleeves for screw-in lower ball joints, that'll be for fabricating the lower control arms. So here's the cool part about how these slugs work is they all got different offsets, and what you do is you pop these into the slotted mounts and then you can change your location based on which slug you're using, which makes for a highly adjustable system. There's also control arms that I'll probably end up ordering that also have a side-to-side motion of adjustability. This is just a quick little mock-up of that pull bar. It'll end up being probably some kind of mount around here somewhere. Anywhere from maybe as high as level, but probably mostly in a downward position. This is looking pretty good that I can make use of this bracket back here. I can also, if I trim this back a little bit, I could get this flipped around where the spring is out on this side and give myself a little bit more clearance here too, but it's basically clear, so it's not going to be much of a difference whatever way it's facing. The main hoop plane is going to be right here, so it's going to be pretty close to that. There is some length adjustability here. Probably, it's going to end up tying in. There'll be a harness bar here somewhere, and maybe right around where we're going to have mounts, because we will need some uphill mounts too. So we'll have some kind of bracket that ties in there, and then maybe a couple reinforcements either in the same plane as the main hoop or tied back. Since the forces will be going forward and backwards, it might be better to tie them into the frame at an angle versus having the center of the main hoop take all that force. So I'm trying to plan out my shock mounts in the rear to do what I did on the other car and incorporate them into the lower control arm mounts. I should be able to do the same thing, super basic, just come off of the stiffening plate in the back side. The big thing I'm looking at here right now is with those wheels, coming in, 7 inches to the back side of the wheel, how tight it's going to be to this coilover, and whether or not I'm going to be able to have enough room, or if I got to make like a tab that comes off of that lower mount a little bit more. But I'm also looking at what the top is doing. Actually, I think kind of where it's sitting at right now wouldn't be that bad. The rim's going to be out here farther. It'll clear, because you're going to have 7.5 inches to the edge of the barrel. It might need to be a little bit taller than right here. This coilover is compressed down to the length I'm looking at as being a good option, because this coilover is quite a bit longer where its effective operating range is, which I could do. It's just the longer it gets, the more like of a kick up and big like bridge system I might have to have reinforcing across the car, which I'm planning on doing anyway. It's just the tighter it can be to this frame rail itself, the less stress, bending stress it's gonna put on it. I mean, like if I had it mounted right here and was gusseted, and I could have just kind of a little bit of a riser thing to hold the force, versus if it ended up here, it's got a lot bigger lever to try to twist with. So with a little more measuring here, I'm looking at if I can be at 4-inch center line for that eyelet on the bottom, which would be right in the center of the brackets I'm planning. I'll be able to clear the wheel, because that'll be right about there. I mean, it'll be pretty tight, but it'll clear. I also got 7.5 diameter out from this axle tube to the, so the rim is entire all the way out here. So there should actually be a lot more room. It'll look close this way, but it'll have more because of the 2.5 from the edge of the frame seems to be a good center distance. I'll have just a little bit of lean to it, but it'll be largely straight up and down, which keeps the shock nice and efficient. This is the beginning of my front section of frame rails. It's the last 2x1/2, so I'm just starting on both ends. And once I get my bends in here, I'll just cut it in the middle, and then I know they'll be equal length then. I need 6 inches of riser for the front end. This part here will connect to the frame I've already got over there on the floor. I'm just going to go 6 inches forward, do a 45 again, and I need a total of 6 inches of rise. So right now, with the frame sitting on the floor, there's the 4 inches of thickness, and I need to have the top be at 10 inches when I'm done. Where I ended up with that number is based on my comparison to the current car and what kind of suspension geometry is working really well on that one. Mostly I'm aimed at what the camber curve is going to end up, so I need to be in a window of where that upper control arm mounts. So I've got a 2-inch center line of that upper control arm, and then I'll have it's either 3/8 or a 1/2 inch, I think a 1/2 inch, plus minus from there in those slugs that I can, move up and down of adjustment. So to be within a 1-inch window there, I need to subtract that 2-inch center line down to the bottom of it, and then I can weld it right to the top of the frame rail, and I'm going to be very close to what I'm targeting. Now, similar to the back of the car, what I did was I took a straight edge, put it on the bottom side of the rail, and then just moved it around until I was showing 6 inches. I'll look at the correct side. In the back I had actually screwed this up so I have more clearance in the back, but it really doesn't matter because that's the back of the car. It's working out very well for where the coilover mounts go anyway. But for the front end, I need to make sure that it ends up where I need it for the upper control arm. So I'm able to hold it tight to the bottom edge of this rail, and then I'm just going to look for a 6 inches of rise. We're measuring 6 here because we're going off the bottom, but if we went off the top, same thing, it'd be 6. The difference here is that I'm realizing all I have to do is get that lined up with the very edge, and we're gonna not worry about this radius screwing us up like it did last time on me. But instead of trying to mark this and then go across and then put the 45, I'm realizing that this is already a 45 that I can mark because of the 90 degrees. This is going to be my 45 cut compared to the tube right here, and it's going to be the line that I need to mark on to put the arc on anyway to bend it back the other direction. So this is going to be a much better way of making that happen. So then when I come back here, I'm going to need to still try to extend this line a little bit past that radius so that I can get the exact point where I can then draw my across line. And now This point right here is going to be my 0 fold point, just like over here, and then I know that we're set at that exact 6 inches of rise that I want after the bend is made. Just like last time, I'm using another piece of tube just to establish parallel as far as, I mean, we got a really short section here. We could probably get away with some tolerance of not being quite right, but I still have just enough tube left here that at least I can check over this front frame rail section, because while it might not matter in this little bit, having the rest of this that far off by the time it gets to the front of the car is going to make an issue. You know, if I didn't quite do this, I'd at least need to make sure that these are matched up. So that's where, just like last time with the rear frame rails, I'm doing this to establish the first one, and then I'll be doing this bend, setting it on top, and then clamping them together to make sure that they're symmetrical. Any other tolerance that I have off after that is just going to be a matter of making sure that these front frame rail sections are absolutely parallel and level, and I can trim anything where they made up a little bit. In the middle, not so much, but I need, you know, this straight section up there to match up, and anything that might need a little fitting down here isn't going to be nearly as big a deal as, say, trying to figure out what to do with a 1/4 inch off once it gets up by the front bumper kind of a thing. Much like the rear rail sections, did the same, got them squared up in the front. To save myself some time, I used the right angle this time just to get one rail pretty close, and then did the same diagonal measurements. This time I marked it 3 feet instead of 4, because 4 would have been a lot weirder to mark out. I wanted to have, these are upside down right now, and the reason I wanted to do that was I wanted this front plane is more important to me as far as being true to each other, because that's where all the suspension geometry is going to be set off. It can be a little goofy down on the actual frame section where there's nothing important going on. that's why I flipped it over. Now I got it tacked. I got to reuse my same 29-inch bars. We're just going to hold that spacing the whole way forward, because it's still going to end up with, you know, engine sitting up in this space, and the headers are pretty much vertical on their outermost face, so it's still going to be close. I only had to adjust it just a little bit. This was way faster the second time around than when I originally did it on the other frame rail sections. I'm changing my mind a little bit. I don't know if it's right or wrong in the way I'm thinking, but really, it's for the amount of twist I got in this right now. Or actually, it's not a twist, just bend on one side. It's not that much. So I want to weld the tops and bottoms on everything else, basically from here back. That way all that can heat cycle and cool down, and then we can check again and see what it is. And then at that point, I don't have to worry about trying to get it lined up and then just to weld on it again and have a tweak somewhere else. I can just, like, it will be assembled, and then I can fix any warp or twist in it. Everything's still cooling down a little bit, but I'm glad I went and decided to do that, because when I flipped it back down, I spent a little more time moving the blocks around, and by doing that I was able to make that basically my entire center section is within a 1/16. My rear frame rails are now back to being within a 1/16, which I knew they were before when it was on the floor. And I got 5/16 high on this rail at the nose, but they're the same here. So I know that it's got to be this rail to move, because I'd rather go with what I knew, all of that matching up. I'll just keep, as long as that stays the same, I can keep truing everything to that, and I should be continuing to stay along the same lines as I've been going. Sometimes I forget I have a laser. So right now it is set up on the passenger side rear frame rail, because I know that that is showing level to the ground anyway. But the laser is self-leveling, so now we can check. I'm just above like a 9 1/16 and 8 3/4. So that is that 5/16 I'm seeing down to the floor. So actually I'm really happy that that's being consistent. It means my floor is probably pretty decent. Here we're sitting at 8 and just over 7/8 and 8 7/8. So I know that we're good on height after the bends. So really my distance being off here is actually just in this straight section. So probably one of these tubes might have had a little crown in it when I was just jigging it up on the floor the other day. So I should be able to just put some welding passes along the bottom side to pull that down up here. But because I know that it's going to be in that section, I think I want to weld all my gussets and everything first, because then I'll only be dealing with this and I won't be dealing with any movement of the gussets afterwards too. We've got the laser set up again. This time shooting center line of the car, because I was looking at it from the front here, and to kind of, I don't know, I could see a little bit of difference. I thought the front looked like it was kind of angled in both ways. I feel like you can see this rail for sure is angled to the left side of your screen. You can see that the rear rail is angled out, and the tape measurement backs that up. So I took tape measure, and I can pull it pretty much anywhere down here, and it'll land on 16.5. I can come up to the very end here, and it's 16.5. However, if I switch to the other rail, you can see it's much closer to 17. So I know that rail is out, this one is straight, and I set that center line off of the top of the rail here. It also repeats just above and below the bend. It repeats all the way down up to here, and then the entire front end is kind of angled off this way. But we gotta weld all them gussets on yet. I haven't done that. I decided to triple check all this stuff, which is a good idea, because now with welding the gussets on, I can actually use the gussets to help pull that back into shape. So with it angled this way, I need it to pull back across. You can kind of see the difference there on center. So if I start by welding this inside edge and this outside edge, I should be able to see this pull back over, and then start switching around some more and try to just use the weld to get this straight. However, I need to be careful because, well, down here I'm less than a 16th off of 16.5. Right here I'm at 16.5. Within a 16th. At the top of these gussets, I'm an 1/8 inch off. So really, it's this last section of gusset up here is what I can use to try to influence that. You know, and it's only a 16th here, but that 16th here over, you know, this little bit of distance is going to multiply by the time I get out to the front of the rail, which might pull that completely straight in. So I'm going to start just a little bit at a time and see how this goes. Alright, the gussets are fully welded on both sides. We did get a little bit closer with the laser, only about an 1/8 inch or so. What did get better was the right there, and there were all about, well, it's a 16th, a 16th, and an 1/8, and now it's 0, 0, and maybe a 16th right at the top, as far as not to center the car. So that's pretty good. At least that improved. I know that that corner is still a 1/4 inch high, so welding a little bit on the bottom edge over here should bring that down, and maybe a couple vertical passes will bring that side in. Do the same thing over here just to pull it. Before I try to straighten out these two fronts, I cut the two tubes out that were holding the spacing, and they sprung apart. We actually got quite a bit of a bigger gap out here at the end right now. By roughly, 3/8 of an inch. And most of that is in this tube, the tube on this side. This one's still up a 1/4 inch. This one's now sprung out that way. This one's actually needs to go an 1/8 inch away versus this side needs to come in 1/2 inch. I'll take care of the 1/4 inch high here first by just heating up and just kind of running a bead to get it to shrink and pull that down out here, since its height is good right at the top of this bend. They're the same side to side there. And then I'll be working on getting them to move the correct direction. Same thing, a little bit of weld on the outside should pull that one out. Some welds here on the inside should pull this one in. Alright, this stuff takes time. I got the driver's side rail to come down within a 1/16 the passenger side, and then I measured again and realized that both needed to go up. Actually, the driver's side was closer because from here forward it was a little downhill. So even when you thought you measured enough, measure again. I did get it to pull in though, as far as it was being tilted out like that. It came in, that's dead nuts, 16.5 the whole way now. We're just trying to get this one to come in because it's got to come in like 1/2 inch. And I've been trying to do that with putting some weld down here because that seems about where it was angled out. I think this whole rail ended up tilted out slightly. This really doesn't seem to have been moving it a whole lot, going passes this way and some vertical. I did put one pass out here that's probably going to have a bigger effect just because it's out in the not gusseted section, but you also got to put the weld on and then wait for it to completely cool down, or it isn't where it's going to go for you. So it takes time, patience, I guess. Alright, I've now had this cool down completely and we're getting really close. So right now I'm sitting at just over a 1/16 over. Actually, it might even be a little closer than that right here. Yeah, like less than a 1/16. I'm an 1/8 out here, so I need to pull this in just a little bit more. But we're right where we need to be on this side. Vertically, well, that's 16th high there. This is right at 10 3/8, and I got 10 3/8 and 10 1/2. So I still need to bring this side up just a smidge. So I'll be putting another bead of weld across the top and down the side. It's, you know, just a matter of being patient with this and figuring out where you need to put a little bit of weld to make it happen. I even noticed that I was a little bit out here, so I put just 2 little strips of weld back here, and that pulled this in too. And once I get these done, I'm going to be pretty, you know, it's got to be very, very close. At which point, whatever I do with the front cross member here is easily going to hold everything in place. That'll be it for this week's video. Basically got our frame set up, ready to go. Just gotta wait on the cross member for the front. I don't have much of a design for that yet. I want to make sure that I get one more of the front suspension planned out before we get into that. And I also got the sway bar tube to put in. Same thing. We're going to get some more of the front suspension planned out before I decide where that's going to go. But yeah, I'm going to get some parts ordered from Cutlass. We're going to get yeah, shouldn't even talk about. We're gonna get some laser cut parts ordered so we can do our torque boxes, rear suspension stuff. That's not holding me back from doing anything, but those are gonna be what I want to get done to really start moving along with the back. And on the front, it's just gonna be a couple more days of planning, and that's probably gonna be the big chunk of the next video, is getting the front cross member and basic suspension stuff figured out.